All right. Well, with that little musical interlude out of the way, let's take a look at the world of consciousness. Again, not an absolutely vital part of the AP course, tends to be a fairly small part of the exam, but good to have some basics here. To begin with, what is consciousness? That's been debated by human beings ever since they had frontal lobes and could even think about consciousness or be conscious. But it sort of boils down to awareness. You see the definition? A person's subjective experience of the world and their own mind. In short, the only thing in the universe you will ever truly know what it is and is like to be. What it is like to be. In other words, being. Are you not thinking what I'm not thinking? Says the one Buddhist monk to the other. It's not quite thinking, it's not quite being alive, it's awareness, it's simply being. And your consciousness is inherently different than mine because at all times we're experiencing different things. It began psychology as a science of consciousness, introspection, Wilhelm Wundt, recalling what are you thinking, what are you experiencing. Of course, by the time of the behaviorists, that really began to change a lot. The behaviorists, the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, everything from John Watson to B.F. Skinner and in between, really, it's not about consciousness. We can't measure the mind. We can't get inside the mind. But the so-called cognitive revolution of the 1950s, especially 1960s and 70s, well, maybe we can get inside the human mind. And you know what? If we can get inside the human mind, we need to start thinking about what consciousness is again. And here we have the iceberg, and you will see this many, many times over the years, often associated with Freud, and there's reasons for that. You have at the very top what we are conscious of. In other words, at any given moment, if I ask you, what color shoes did your dad wear yesterday? You would say, they were puke green. I recall that. You're conscious at that point. It's what you're aware of at any given second. And then below that, you've got the non-conscious. It's a part of your mind. It's a part of your experience. You're just not thinking about it. And there's actually a couple of different ways of thinking about it. The non-conscious, for example, non-conscious processing, I think there was a question along those lines from a recent exam, I think from the midterm. Non-consciousness means it happens without any awareness. For example, your brain makes your heart beat through the medulla oblongata. That's non-conscious processing. It just happens. Your breathing, reflexes that you have. You've also then got the pre-conscious. And the preconscious is stuff that you can be conscious of. You know, but it's not a part of your experience at that moment. As an example, if I were to ask you, what is the capital of Thailand? Well, many of you would say, man, I don't know. And you don't know. Others would say, it's Bangkok. Now, Bangkok 10 seconds ago was not a part of your conscious experience. It was in your preconscious. It was in your memory, and by retrieving that memory, you're pulling it into your conscious because you're thinking about Bangkok. If I were to ask you what is the capital of Peru, I am guessing that nobody listening to this was thinking about the capital of Peru being Lima, but the moment I asked you about it, we simply added, you thought, Lima, and Lima is now a part of your consciousness. And then at the very, very bottom, and this is where the Freudian aspect comes in, the unconscious. It's there. It affects you, but you're not aware of it. We'll get into this into a later unit. So again, the conscious, the brain process of which we are aware. The non-conscious, the brain processes that do not involve any processing, heart rate, breathing, control of internal organs. Right now, your pancreas is secreting something or other else. Well, the message is coming from your brain to do that. It's making you function, but you simply have no conscious ability to make it happen or to monitor it. The preconscious, once again, information that's not there, but if you call attention to it, you can bring it into your conscious. And then the unconscious. This all happens without current awareness. And if you believe Freud on this, and again, we will get back into Freud into more detail, what you've got at this point is the stuff that affects you on a regular basis, but you simply are not aware of it. And for Freud, this was early childhood experiences that formed who you are. As I said, we'll get to it. So once again, why I put this on a second time, I don't know. But a reminder of the difference. I will tell you that non-conscious and unconscious tend to be confused by students pretty regularly. So make sure you understand. Non-conscious is it happens, you're never aware of it, all there is to it. The unconscious is stuff that is more a part of your memory, a part of your personal experience, but you may not recognize that it affects you. In fact, Freud would say, you would argue to the end of the days that it does not. What happened to me as a small child does not affect me, etc. Whereas the non-conscious, we would recognize, hey, I don't have to process my breathing or heart rate, but I know it's there. And then we're moving into sleep, which is really the major part of this little mini unit. Circa means about. Dia means day. It's a more or less daily rhythm of sleep. Now you notice you would assume that there is a 24-hour sleep cycle because days are 24 hours long. Actually, it appears when they put people into isolation chambers and allow them to sleep without any external cues and to wake up, they tend to work on, and I don't know the reason behind this, 25-hour cycle. So they tend to wake up an hour later each day. Again, don't know why that is, but roughly about 24 to 25-hour cycles. Really important. If you sleep too little, it leads to a sleep debt. And a sleep debt, one of the assignments that I've given you that's an optional is to read a little bit about sleep debt or sleep deficits and the effect that it can have on people. And particularly with younger people who are driven, who are focused, who are studying, who are taking on 10 different things at the same time, that is often a real problem. One of the things that we know, massive sleep debt causes problems in terms of health, in terms of psychological well-being, and as much as you might think, well, if I just sleep 3 hours a night instead of 6, I'll learn so much more, probably not. You probably function very, very poorly, very inefficiently. The key really is that light actually triggers a hormone called melatonin. And you might have heard people that have some sleep issues taking melatonin. It artificially replaces it. But that's the key. It naturally is increased at nighttime, and that's one of the reasons we fall asleep. I don't know anything about that particular nucleus, the name of which I cannot possibly pronounce. There are, well, it's another one of these frustrating things about psychology. You would want to say, how many sleep cycles are there? Well, the answer is that there are 4 plus one more. Honestly, they really should call this 5 stages of sleeping, but it is often referred to as stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a completely different stage that is absolutely a stage, but it is not referred to as that 5th stage of sleep. We'll explain this and go through these. It is worth knowing the difference between the two of them. So the 4 of them, and I'll try to really point out the ones that tend to show up. First of all, we have, well, to begin with, your body produces what we call alpha waves. Alpha as in awake, letter A, letter A. Alpha waves is the electronic energy in your brain while you're awake, while you're conscious. Remember, this is measured by an EEG, electroencephalogram. And the electroencephalogram measures your overall electrical behavior activity in your brain. So when you're awake, you have alpha waves. When you start moving into sleep, you are seeing theta waves. Now you see them, stage 1, it's the green line here. You are seeing fairly short, fairly shallow waves. We then, as we move from stage 1 into stage 2, the waves become deeper. There are these little areas that are called, and you'll see this on the screen, these little bursts of activity, as they call them, where the brain suddenly goes, and that is called a sleep spindle. I will tell you that I don't understand the sleep spindle. I don't have any idea why it's important to separate stage 1 from stage 2. I will tell you that if you were to get a question on the AP exam asking you which of these stages involves the sleep spindles, if you can remember this, you just got a question right. Moving then into the deeper stages 3 and 4. The difference between 3 and 4, honestly, I don't know, and you're not going to be expected to know it. In a lot of ways, knowing that in stage 1, where you're half awake, half asleep, moving in, you're moving from alpha waves to theta waves, that's worth knowing. Again, sleep spindles for stage 2, to whatever degree that matters. And stages 3 and 4 with the delta waves, notice that deep sleep and delta waves. That might be a way to remember it. You need to know almost nothing about stage 3. I know nothing about stage 3. Stage 4 is a pretty key one, as you'll see. And again, you'll notice the high amplitude waves, the slower patterns of deeper brain waves. When somebody is deeply, deeply asleep, hard to wake up. I can't believe he's sleeping through that, certainly in stage 3 or 4. Stages 1 or 2, you can wake somebody up fairly easily. And then we have the 5th stage. And again, why this is simply called REM sleep as opposed to stage 5, stage 1, etc. It's fairly confusing for people. And it's actually interesting how this came about. Long ago, we're talking the 1950s or so, some experimenters had the electrodes hooked up to a child's head. They were measuring the overall activity of the brain. And strangely, they noticed that the young child started exhibiting these brain waves that were super rapid fire, and they were happening when a person should not have been brain active. These are beta waves, except they're as if you are actually awake at this point. And they go, oh, what's going on? He must have woken up. He didn't wake up. Okay, well, there's something wrong with the equipment. Nah, not really. And then one of the experimenters said, hey, you notice, I'm watching this kid. I'm noticing that when things are moving like that, when we're getting these beta waves that move really, really quickly, they're low amplitude, but they're fast. This is not awake. I'm noticing his eye is blinking. He's doing these little facial movements. You know, this may be a different type of sleep. And in fact, this is now known as rapid eye movement or REM sleep. What's tricky about this is partly the way it's worded on the slide. You go through the night starting at stage 1 as you drift out of consciousness or into the separate stage of consciousness. You move into stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, deep, deep sleep, and then you reverse and go back to stage 3, stage 2, stage 1, and then you enter a period of REM sleep in which your brain is acting as if you're awake, but in fact you are still asleep because these are beta waves that should be moving fairly quickly. What do you suppose is happening during this point? You're asleep, but your brain is acting like it's awake. Well, this is where most of your dream activity comes from. Also, because it's not a deep sleep, you tend to wake up fairly easily. It's also most of the dreams that you remember. You do actually dream throughout the sleep cycle. This has been demonstrated, but it's primarily during this REM period where the most vivid dreams, the most active dreams are. Here you're seeing the cycles here. And if you look at the graph on the right, you will notice that the longer you sleep, the more time you spend in REM sleep. What do you notice about stage 4, the deepest sleep? You start off spending a lot of time, and then after about the second or so sleep cycle of the night, it disappears completely. And if you sleep 6, 7, 8 hours, you basically don't experience stage 3 or stage 4 anymore. If you look at the graph on the right, you see the person is awake, goes into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and then repeats stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. And that little kind of brownish gold line you're seeing up there, that is the REM sleep, fairly brief initially. That takes about an hour and a half or so. And then you go back into stage 2, back to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, 3, 2, 1, and a slightly longer REM period. Right now you're about 3 to 4 hours in your night's sleep. You go back to stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, but you don't go to stage 4, back to 2, to 1, longer period of REM. By the time you get to about 5 or 6 hours of sleep, You're going from REM to stage 1 to stage 2, back to stage 1, longer time in REM. And the longer time you sleep, the longer time you have that rapid eye movement or REM sleep. And again, that's where the most vivid dreams seem to be created. The areas that are active during dreaming, the motor areas, visual areas, amygdala, hippocampus. What's not working, and this is key because if you think, man, I've got some really strange dreams. I mean, some of my dreams are really odd. There you go. Your frontal lobe is largely cut off. Rational thinking, logical thought, it's not there. Now, it is true that they call this lucid dreaming, where you're half asleep, half awake, and can sometimes construct the dream or reflect as if you're awake upon it. Your frontal lobe is coming back again to a degree. But for the most part, it's all other parts of the body, particularly you notice in the limbic system. Memory consolidation happens a lot. The amygdala, absolutely. The visual areas, absolutely, because you are seeing things in your dreams. The motor areas, you would think this means that when you're dreaming, you're running all over the place. Actually, that's not the case. In fact, REM sleep is also called paradoxical sleep. What is a paradox? It's two doxes. That's a joke. Paradox means two things that would seem to be contradictory. You would expect that if you are in REM sleep, you're having vivid active dreams, you would assume that you'd be moving all over the place. In fact, most of your body is actually paralyzed. We call this sleep paralysis. And you know what? It makes sense. Can you think of an evolutionary reason why, at the times we are having the most active and dramatic dreams, why it would be at that point? And this is a funny cartoon. I won't read it to you. You know how to read, but it's pretty darned funny. Then we have what we call sleep disorders. One of the questions they love to ask you, these are problems with sleep, and they can affect people pretty dramatically. One of the questions they love to ask you is, what is the most common sleep disorder? And you think, oh, it's got to be, walking in your sleep or night terrors, or it's not. It's insomnia. It's inability to sleep well, to fall asleep, to stay asleep. Very, very common. This can be everything from coffee intake to perhaps natural chemical issues that you have to anxiety, stress, etc. can be a big part of that. And that's worth something, certainly if you do that extra reading from the Harvard Medical School that I had recommended, I think you'd get a lot more insight into that. There's also somnambulism. Ooh, what a great term that is. You know what that is? That's sleepwalking. Um, Contrary to popular belief, many people assume, oh, this must be when you're dreaming heavily, you're in REM sleep. It's not. Sleepwalking and night terrors both are stage 3, 4, deep, deep sleep. You may have heard it's very difficult to wake up a sleepwalker. It is difficult to wake up a sleepwalker. Why? He or she is in the deepest level of sleep and generally has no particular memory of this at all. By the way, it is not thought to be actually dangerous to wake up a sleepwalker. That is a misconception that a lot of people have. Very similar, but a little bit different, are night terrors. Now, these are absolutely stage 4. And this is in the depths of sleep and not necessarily, certainly like so far asleep that it's hard to wake up. The person will suddenly wake up, begin sleepwalking, talking, running about, moving dramatically, heart is racing, etc. And I know about this myself. This is something that is particularly common among pre-adolescent males. It can happen at other ages, but generally at just before puberty, and generally males more than females. And about 1974, as my parents tell me, I had gone to sleep on the couch watching TV. My dad had driven a friend of ours home who did not drive. He had been over for the night. And by the time he got back, my mom was dealing with me. I was running about the house. I was punching walls. I was screaming. I was sweating. I was throwing things. I took a flying leap, kicking leap at the TV set. And of course, my parents were absolutely freaked out. I finally woke up. They woke me up, and I didn't remember this at all. And this happened a number of times. And immediately they take me to a psychologist trying to figure out what's wrong. And it turns out it's a fairly common thing called night terrors. It would not be surprising if people in this room either experienced them themselves or somebody in the family did. I have one distinct memory of this. At one point, I recall coming out of my room, falling down the stairs, and when I fell down the stairs, I was angry with myself, so I came and smashed my head against a wall. And that's something, of course, could be pretty dangerous, and I guess if you get to know me, might explain rather a lot, but that's another story. But what I recall at this point is actually being able to access my dream at the point. And in the dream, I had a bird's eye view of my own brain in which I could see that something was wrong with it and I could only move backwards. And I was just incredibly frustrated with this. I was screaming, I was kicking, I was pounding walls, etc. Honestly, you know what the cure is for night terrors? You outgrow them. You make certain that the young person generally doesn't harm his or herself, normally his self, while going through this. But it's something that just comes and then disappears in time, and it did. I mean, as late as when I was about 13 or 14, I would occasionally not wake up, but get out of bed in stage four, go to my parents' room, shake my dad, and say, "I'm going to sleep now." And he's, "Huh? What?" And I'd go right back to sleep. So those were like the residual traces of the night terror. Narcolepsy, unusual, but I have known a couple of narcoleptics. It's a person who can go from middle of a conversation to boom, falling asleep. It can happen mid-sentence. It can happen sometimes while standing up or driving, and if it's not medicated, it can actually be quite dangerous for this reason. There is a good medical treatment for narcolepsy that I believe has some side effects, but it largely does work. But a couple people, a math teacher at a school I once taught at, Kevin, had narcolepsy, and he would tell the students. Apparently, he was not the most severe type. He wouldn't literally be walking down the halls and collapse, but occasionally he would be sitting at his desk and just whoom, fade off. And he warned the students, says, if this happens, this is what you do. And open secret, everybody knew about it. So narcolepsy. And then finally, sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is often related to severe snoring. Tends to be in people that are somewhat overweight, the bronchial tubes get blocked, etc. And what a person will be doing with sleep apnea is literally waking up hundreds of times every night. The air gets cut off, they now, they don't wake up, they're not conscious of this, but very often with sleep apnea, although it's not very likely that you actually choke to death or suffocate during a sleep apnea attack, you never really sleep. Your REM sleep in particular gets interrupted, and you're simply not able to get the type of rest that you need. I first learned about this about 20 years ago. I was staying at a teacher conference and ended up with a nice guy named Rudy. He was my roommate for the night. And Rudy said, "Hey, I hope this won't bother you, but I have sleep apnea." I said, "What's that?" He told me. And he said, "The problem is I can't really breathe very well. So I've got this machine." And it was this huge machine that pumped bursts of oxygen into a mask that he would wear. So all night I would have to hear, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to sleep by 5 minutes this weekend. And for the first 20 minutes the first night, I thought, I will never get to. And I guess I developed narcolepsy, or more likely, I just, here's an old unit term, I habituated. I got used to it. I adapted to the sound and didn't really notice it after that. So those are the five that you would need to know. In particular, remember that insomnia is the most common one. And again, you'll see that question a lot. And again, dreams, REM sleep, etc. Again, this is so misleading the way they do this because you would stare at this graph and say, oh, after stage four, you go into REM sleep. And of course, that is completely, absolutely wrong. And I really probably should just go ahead and change this some year. Again, you start with the alpha waves, you're awake, you're functioning, you drift off into stage one, stage two, stage three, stage four, the deep delta waves, and then back up through three, two, one. And then there is the REM phase, the more active zip, 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 where you are dreaming, you're active, your eyes are blinking, your body may be twitching, and then you disappear into stage one, stage two, stage three, stage four, back up, 4, 3, 2, 1, REM sleep. Once again, these are about 90-minute cycles, more or less. You have about 4 or 5 over the course of the night. And remember, after about 2 of these stages, stage 4 and then stage 3 disappear entirely, and you spend more and more of your night in REM sleep by the end of the night. Well, what do we dream? First of all, most dreams are negative. Estimates are about 80% of what we dream are unpleasant, have negative emotional content. Among the most common are failure dreams. Something that you can't do, something you can't accomplish, you lose something, you fail to be able to run when being pursued, etc. Now, we tend to think that, oh, especially with men, every dream is a sexual dream. Actually, relatively few of them are. It's estimated that with men, about 1 in 10 have a sexual component, although somebody like Freud would say, well, actually, all dreams are sexual, just maybe that's the manifest content as opposed to latent content. So the latent content is sexual, even if it's about something else. Women do appear to dream less overtly sexual dreams, about a third. Two-thirds less likely than men to engage in sexual dreams. Most women do at some point, but it is less common. And interestingly, women dream about men and women more or less equally. Men dream more about men than women. Possibly that's because that's what we see the day to day. It's traditionally we've had a male dominated society and men are more a part of the public life. I'm only guessing about that though. Why do we dream? Well, Sigmund Freud, who we'll deal with in the next unit, was pretty clear. Dreams are a psychic safety valve, he called it. We have all this terrible, frightening, unconscious thoughts, fears, etc., that we don't dare recognize to other people or even to ourselves. These dreams allow those feelings, those fears, those desires to come out. Again, he is the manifest content. What is shown? Well, this is a story about me eating 23 bananas and 16 oranges. But what does it really mean underneath? And that is the latent or hidden content. So Freud believed it served mainly that psychological purpose. There's also an idea of information processing. Do you ever find yourself before final exams, you dream about something school related? Well, yes, absolutely. It's simply a way of working through what's been happening day to day, what's been happening in your life, what you're most interested in, concerned about, etc. There's a definite physiological function. I would like to know a lot more about this. One of the things increasingly that's clear, and this is with REM sleep in particular, is that there is a massive amount of memory consolidation that happens. The hippocampus simply is chemically altered, it's structurally altered. Memories that had been partially formed are consolidated during this period. Again, one of the reasons why it appears that the most effective time to study for something is maybe an hour before you go off to bed. Because you're not replacing this new information with other stuff you've learned, but also the stuff is basically fresh in your mind and ready to be consolidated via REM sleep. You will notice that small children, they sleep all day. Babies, infants, they sleep 16, 17, 18 hours a day, and much of that sleep is REM sleep. You'll notice as people get older, they sleep less altogether, and relatively little of that time is spent in REM as well. I'm there now. I'm probably 6 hours a night is probably about right for me. At your age, I would have needed more. There's also what we call activation synthesis theory, and I'll do something in class that I think will help you with this. But the idea is that basically brains don't like disorder. Look, your brain's still active. There are still all these electrical charges happening in your brain when you sleep. Well, what do we do with that energy? The brain unconsciously takes that energy and turns it into stories. Doesn't mean that there's no wish fulfillment, doesn't mean there's no information processing, but it's basically a way of dealing with that energy that's being produced. And then certainly the idea that as we dream, part of the brain, it develops, it matures. It simply is a way of maintaining the brain, the strength, forming connections, etc., etc. It's very clear that simply sleeping but not getting REM sleep does relatively little for you. Experiments have been done. The moment somebody goes into REM sleep, that person's waken up, they find that they can barely function after a couple days, as bad or worse than being, 3 bottles of vodka drunk. They simply can't function. This is interesting, though. If you go through a period where you're not sleeping a lot, or you're not getting the REM sleep, although generally it's just not sleeping enough, you will go into REM a lot quicker that first night that you sleep well, and it will last a lot longer, the REM area was. That is called REM rebound. So sleep deficit leads to an overall REM deficit and then almost immediately you would fall into a sense of a condition of REM rebound, where you simply sleep a lot more and you get more REM sleep, more dream type activity, because that seems to be what your brain needs. And then finally, this is exactly the same thing that I just had said to you, but it's there in one neat little poof pile, etc. So this is what you need to know about dream theory. Again, I will dreams and about basic consciousness. I'll take a quick look at your notes, come on in with a couple of questions, be it content specific or just open-ended type stuff, and we'll talk about it in class. See you soon.